Hey everybody, it's Dr. Eric Balcavage and Dr. Eric Riggleman. We're back with another edition of the Thyroid Answers Podcast, and we have two long-time acquaintances with us today, Dr. Joel Rosen and Dr. John Thomas. We've known these guys for years, but these guys are now working on a really new program that we were introduced to, and now we're excited to get them on and have them talk about it. It's going to launch pretty soon. So guys, can you just introduce yourselves quickly, give us a little background who you are and how you why you got this program started.
Okay. Hey, Eric, I'll go first, just because my name R comes before T. So as far as who I am, I'm Joel Rosen. I grew up in Canada. I live in Florida now, which is awesome. It's nice and warm where there is a beach all the time. And basically, I dealt with my own exhaustive related to stress, burnt out, not being able to focus and concentrate. And I learned in my own ways about the controversies of adrenal fatigue. And really that's what I do now, Eric, is I help people who have learned about this debilitating more than just the adrenal condition. And we really help tie in the stress response and the environmental component and genetics now. And we help to customize a recovery program around that. So that's what I do.
So you've got your own podcast or your own kind of forum, and I've been on your podcast a couple times, right? And
yep.
Now you've partnered with John to do this MTHFR Master Course. So John, can you guys give the listeners a little bit of background on you as well?
Yeah, I have a practice right outside Atlanta, Georgia, and basically focus on genetic components and really the stressors that play into one's genetic predisposition. More and more of the people I'm working with tend to be families with kids that are on the spectrum. And so it's something I'm becoming really, really passionate about because a lot of these families don't have a lot of places to turn. And we kind of look at things from a functional perspective and correlate, some of the things we look at from a genetic predisposition, some magical things happen. And so I'm very passionate about that. I got two young kids. I kind of got into this genetic aspect initially because of fertility issues. My wife's got 3 copies of the MTHFR gene. So that really started me down this kind of rabbit hole, and then has really kind of expanded into where things are today for me.
Okay. So you guys are both functional medicine practitioners. I know you guys both have some background in functional neurology as well. And now you guys are putting together this MTHFR masterclass, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, I've got to be honest with both of you guys. I've been doing methylation stuff for a number of years, genetics, epigenetics, methylation, taught a course on methylation, worked with a good friend of mine as he was putting together his genetic report. And when Joel said, hey, we're doing this MTHFR masterclass, I was like, oh, great. Just exactly what another world needs is another course on MTHFR. And hopefully they're not going to be telling people just take methylfolate and B12 and all is going to be right in the world. And Joel definitely kept pushing the button and said, hey, just take a look at what we were doing. And when I finally did, I was really happy with what I saw. It was not the standard MTHFR as this and take methylfolate, and it wasn't the same, kind of canned gene SNPs that people tend to talk about, COMT and CBS, which drives me nuts. And so everybody has a tendency to get really hyper focused on a couple gene SNPs, and I thought you guys were doing the same thing. So initially I didn't want to. I was like, eh. But then when I looked at it, I got to tell you, I was really impressed with the stuff that you were going to cover. And that's why we wanted to get you on here to talk about some of these things. And some of those genes that you guys cover, I got to be honest, I haven't seen anybody really put any time and attention to some of these genetic SNPs that you guys are going to focus on. I will tell you that in the traditional functional medicine world right now, they're not the sexy ones, but I do think they're critically important to the patient base that we're reaching out to, which is these people that struggle with cellular hypothyroidism. So if one of you guys could, maybe Joel, this is a great question to you. When we're talking about MTHFR, I think some people understand what MTHFR is, and some of the listeners may just think I'm using a curse word. Can you explain what MTHFR is, and maybe when I'm saying genetic polymorphisms or epigenetics, can you just kind of explain those three terms for our listeners?
Sure. So starting with methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase, MTHFR, really what that enzyme does is it helps get the synthetic or the folic version of the B vitamin into a methylated form that we can use for energy production. So over 250 cellular processes in the body require proper methylation, where MTHFR is pretty much the initiating point of the highway where all other avenues go to, so that you can produce energy at the level that you need to. And if it's a SNP, meaning a single nucleotide polymorphism, it means that either one parent or both parent pass them down an altered efficient enzyme that doesn't get replicated properly. So we use the example, the MTHFR highway, and you're really getting from north to south. MTHFR is the off-ramp to be able to make methylfolate. And if you've inherited a single nucleotide polymorphism, it will slow down traffic in that highway system from 8 lanes to 2 lanes, or sorry, up to 2 lanes. If it's a homozygous, which means both parents gave you back those copies where the enzyme isn't being replicated and it's slowing down your ability to produce energy. If it's one parent, that's called a heterozygous SNP, and that means that you could, it's not 100% accurate analogy, but you get the idea that it's going to slow down traffic so that without even looking at other stressors or cofactors or nutrients that are required or car accidents or inhibitors, before you look at any of those things, we're just specifically looking at how well are those highways able to handle traffic, or how well are those highways set up to produce energy. And if people are dealing with a hypothyroid problem or autoimmunity, then we would be remiss to not even look at those highways to see how we can support them making energy. Hopefully that answers your question there.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot, and I'll just kind of summarize that for the listeners a little bit. We have all these genes in our body. The genes, when they need to express themselves, they make enzymes and proteins and help rebuild tissue, all kinds of great things in the body. And so sometimes you have genes that may have I hate even to say a defect, but a change in the amino acid sequence in there, which can make the gene either work a little faster or a little bit slower when it's doing its replication process. So it can make things a little less, either excessively efficient, too efficient, or under efficient, I guess is the easy way to say it. MTHFR really critical, as you said, because it ties into energy production and detoxification. There's so many things that we need these little things called methyl donors, which is a carbon and 3 hydrogens to do. And it's critical to optimal health and physiology. But there's more to the story than MTHFR. MTHFR is just one of those gene polymorphisms. It's caught a lot of attention, and it can really create a problem for people, but there's more than that, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, that's just what, like John, I'm going to steal it from John before he has a chance to use it. But really, I think it's a great analogy where MTHFR is sort of the first chapter of the Harry Potter books. And when you look at the MTHFR only in and of itself and say, okay, have a pretty good idea how this ends, and you finish the first chapter with MTHFR on your radar, you're really doing yourself a disservice. You're really not, you're flying blind. And so there's a lot of different enzymes, which John will get into and how we outline the course. But just to get back to your original concern, Eric, with the MTHFR Crash Course, that's exactly why we named it that, because you get such a diverse representation of people that would this be a good course for, where the ones that have no idea what we're talking about or MTHFR sounds like a swear word, and then those that have really been well learned. And John's told me this before, when you play at this game, you've got to know this stuff inside out. There's no dabbling with this at all. And those people know their stuff. So we really feel that this crash course is designed with the intentions of how do we give the people the tools that don't know anything at all, as well as those that really know their stuff, and really give them the tools to how to look at this, what their options are, what language to speak, how to approach their doctors, what supplements or nutrients could be supportive for them, so that they're left with cheat sheets, but also with a compass on how to think about this sequentially. So, and use that in everyday life in terms of practical applications, meaning if you do have a cellular hypothyroid problem or you're autoimmune, where are going to be those susceptibilities or those perfect storms in the highway where you have a 2-lane or a 4-lane, and you also happen to have lack of cofactors, so we call that tolls to play on the toll highway, and you also have car accidents on there. We want to find out which highway system. Was it you're repairing your DNA? Was it being able to turn off the expression? Was it able to produce hormones or remove hormones? And we really want to prioritize that. So that's why we called it the MTHFR Crash Course. And we also know that it's at least a heavier search term with people that would know at the very least, oh, there's this genetic component. Let's at least get those that have that on their radar, invite them into our program, and then really sort of lift the curtains and show you how much is behind there in terms of how much this is really involved in putting these pieces together. It goes so much beyond MTHFR by itself.
Oh, absolutely. I think people really get stuck on the whole MTHFR thing, whether it's they're finding something on a blog or a support group, or maybe even their medical doctor has run a test. And I've seen this over and over where a medical doctor will run a genetic test and it'll only be MTHFR. They hand them a lab report and tell them, you have this genetic SNP, you know, take methylfolates or take this vitamin and everything should be good. And I think there's a misconception. Then they go online and they get really stuck on thinking that it's just that they're living in this little box of MTHFR, but they don't realize there's so many other genes out there that impact MTHFR, the whole process. And these are all cycles that all play off of each other. So you can't take MTHFR in isolation either. You have to consider the whole picture, which again, like you said, if you're not ingrained in the whole picture, you can't just focus in on that one little pathway.
But I think,
yeah, 100%.
I think that fits the medical allopathic model though, which is, hey, one gene SNP, one problem, one solution, versus more of a functional medicine perspective, which is, hey, this is a piece, not the piece. And we have to look at the big picture. Some people could have this gene polymorphism MTHFR and have it not really even be an issue for them. I know I have it, and for the vast majority of time, it's not a significant issue. Under times of higher stress, it becomes a bigger issue. You know, John, much like your wife, my wife's got multiples of those, and it does come into play. And so at times you have to be aware of it, but I think we have to take the allopathic thought process out of this when we look at genetics, and instead of saying, oh, this gene is the problem, we have to say it's really just more of a map to help us understand where things could break down, not necessarily that it is the place that breaks down. I think your analogy, Joel, is probably pretty good, which is if you're traveling on the major highway, you know that in times of higher traffic load, you know, those areas where there's narrowing of the highway, those are going to be areas where the traffic tends to be a problem. But if you're traveling off hours, off peak, those narrower areas of the roadway where it goes from an 8-lane to 2-lane may not be an issue at all. So we have to not be focused on treating SNPs per se, which I know is the sexy thing to do online. We have to be aware of how it fits into helping somebody, help them heal and improve. So,
but it's also not a dooms diagnosis either. I mean, I get people who call my office or patients who write me online are like, oh my gosh, I was just diagnosed with MTHFR, and they think it's the end of the world to them. And it may be a problematic factor in what you've got going on with your chronic health issues, or it may not. I mean, there's plenty of people with the MTHFR SNPs that have no problems whatsoever. You know, I always tell people I can take two people who have genetic SNPs and one may have to work a little bit harder to maintain health versus somebody else. But there's plenty of people who I see who are chronically ill who don't have MTHFR too. So it's not a doomsday either.
Correct. And I think that's where maybe, John, you could tie into what we often talk about is genetic expression and epigenetics. And there's a huge difference between just having a genetic polymorphism and something called epigenetics, which is what influences how those genes express. Can you explain those a little bit for the listeners?
Yeah, absolutely. The genetic aspect, everybody kind of gets married to the genetics wherever they're seeing these reports. And as you all know, it really comes more to those epigenetic factors, because I always use an example of a light switch or a dimmer switch when it comes to genetics. You could have these genetic issues and it may not be expressed, it may not be a problem, but the bigger fact of this is a lot of times those epigenetic factors that plays to our genetic expression that creates that perfect storm. And that's where a lot of times the problem lies. And to kind of go back with what Joel was saying about, traffic on the highway, I always tell patients that, all right, our genetic predisposition is the amount of lanes, and so if you're looking at a genetic report and you have no, polymorphisms there, it's like you have 8 lanes for traffic to flow. And if you have mutations, you have less lanes. So if let's say you have a, homozygous MTHFR, instead of having 6 lanes available, maybe you only have 1 lane available for traffic to flow. But really what it comes down to is traffic on the highway. And if it's 3:30 in the morning and you have one lane for traffic to flow and there's only 2 cars on the road, it's not a problem. But if it's rush hour, 5:30 in the afternoon here in Atlanta, and you got a stretch of the road that narrows from 6 lanes down to 1 lane, and you're putting more and more traffic on the road, that's where the problem lies. And the traffic really are the epigenetic components. And these could be things like, the chemicals we're exposed to in foods and previous infections, heavy metal burden, all these different stressors that can really, like you said, Eric, are going to either, speed up or slow down, how the enzymes in our body work based on the stress and the demand on the system.
Yeah, we can look at the epigenetics like the traffic on the highway, right? So
absolutely.
And I think, John, you and I are saying exactly the same thing, right? It's really not about the road per se. It's about the stress that we put on that load. So it would be the epigenetics would be the traffic. And one of the big challenges we see in traditional courses on genetics and epigenetic and MTHFR and some of these other things is the focus is many times on the cofactors that will make the gene express better versus maybe what's inhibiting the genetic expression. Many times the inhibitor is the bigger issue and the thing that probably needs to be addressed before you just load the body with more cofactors, because we have this issue in, I think we typically see from people move out of the medical model and they move into this functional model. And then they're really using the same thought processes. Well, if I just flood the system with more stuff, then everything will work. And people start loading themselves with excessive amounts of supplements, trying to turn on the gene expression or make that one enzyme work based on what they want to have happen versus what the cellular intelligence wants to happen, right? So,
absolutely.
I know when I look through the course, you guys are going to be covering some different genes than people and polymorphisms than people typically talk about when people are talking about MTHFR and methylation. So what are the big gene polymorphisms that you guys are going to be covering in this course? And the course is going to be it's a 6-week course, I believe, right?
Yeah, we're doing a 6-week live course, and we wanted to do this live just so we could have some interaction, in terms of, being able to hold people's hand through this, because everybody's kind of starting point is a little bit different. But really what we wanted to do was kind of, put a course together beyond just the usual suspects, beyond MTHFR, beyond CBS gene mutations, beyond the COMT gene mutations, because that's what everybody's talking about. And everybody's, like you said, trying to kind of, bombard people with cofactors to get those enzymes to turn on or work more effectively. And the thing is and we see this all the time, I'm sure you all do too, is that doesn't work. There's more to it. And so just, with what I do in practice, looking at genetic reports all day and just seeing people with chronic health issues, there's when you look at genetics a little bit deeper, there's sometimes these recurring themes. And when I'm kind of label these as kind of deal breakers. And so through this course, we're really wanting to teach people to kind of stop being, number one, married to their genetics, and understand the epigenetic component. But you got to look at the whole picture. You got to get away from the usual suspects, because those usual suspects like MTHFR, when you're trying to prioritize this, a lot of these people with chronic health issues like thyroid, low thyroid function, there's bigger fish in the sea. And what we've really done is put a course together that's going to allow and empower people to be able to kind of investigate, do they have some of these deal breakers there? There's genes we really focus on in this course that deal with histamine metabolism. There's the ABP1 genes that deal with diamine oxidase production in the gut that in itself could lead into, an increased histamine burden. And then piggybacking on that, talking about some of the new genes that are kind of in the research to do with mast cell activation. There's these HRH1, HRH2, HRH4 genes that kind of see a recurring theme that people have, like all of these histamine-mediated symptoms that have a lot of genetic weakness in some of these mast cell-based genes. We're looking at genes that deal with iron and copper and magnesium transport, iron transport, some of the SLC genes, the solute transport carrier genes that deal with how the body can transport iron from the gut to the bloodstream, and how the body can transport iron from outside the cell to inside the cell, is to me a foundational thing. And I think is the kind of the biggest priority in this arena with people with chronic health issues, because if you don't regulate your iron properly, it's just going to massively continue to fuel inflammation in people. There's a lot of momentum now in, autophagy, which is a concept in terms of how the cells can actually go in and either scrub out sick cells, and if they can't do that, then be able to stimulate kind of a self-destructive mechanism if there is an inflammatory or a infectious component of cells. Some people have genetic weakness in these ULK genes that deal with autophagy. So there's a handful of genes that are kind of some of these usual suspects that we're not looking at, that are more of kind of the deal breaker components that people have, and sometimes are significant missing pieces. And then all those other things like MTHFR and CBS and COMT all kind of play back into this, because this stuff's not linear. It's all these cycles working synergistically together, because when we talk about like the histamine breakdown, you need methylation activity to clear histamine. And so a lot of these people just are kind of MTHFR, not realizing that, all right, yes, maybe the MTHFR weakness is there, but the bigger picture is, hey, they've got these other factors over here that deal with histamine and mast cell activation. They need that methylation activity to control that. And it's got to be kind of a different prioritization and a kind of a different game plan. It's kind of how to address some of these things and how they kind of work, synergistically together.
Yeah. So, and what I think is really important when we kind of unpack everything that you just said there is we're seeing the people that are coming to the podcast are either doctors who are struggling with patients who have chronic hypothyroid symptoms and they don't know what to do, or the patients themselves. And at the root of what's creating your hypothyroid symptoms is the deactivation in the cellular system. And I think what's really important, for people, if they decide to take your course, is that one of the key factors that relates to the cell danger response and cellular hypothyroidism is things like iron dysregulation, right? And so it's not that these gene SNPs or these polymorphisms are something that you can't, it's, as Dr. Erica said, it's not one of these do or die things. Oh my gosh, you have it, there's nothing you can do. For many people, they lived, 15, 20, 30, 40 years with these genes and it had no major issue. But when there's excessive cellular stress and that cell danger response kicks in that we talk about quite a bit, and you have inflammation kick in and we have cellular hypothyroidism, the body's switch in physiology to deal with the threat then can make some of these polymorphisms really become more problematic. You're going to have a harder time with control, maybe, and managing the impact of the cell danger response, especially when it comes to an excessive histamine response. Histamine is a protective mechanism, right? The histamine is there to try and help kill a threat. We need histamine to help support stomach acid, right? So it's not that we see sometimes people like, I've got histamine or mast cell activation issue. I need to be suppressing my histamine. That's not the solution either. It's about getting to the root cause of what's driving the excessive histamine response. And if you know that your genetics, and you can correct me, John, if I'm wrong, but if you know that your genetics predispose you to not have great histamine control because of methylation, because of DAO, because of other genetic polymorphisms, then what you're looking at is, then you can better understand, and your doctor can better understand the situation to help kind of pull you out of that chronic health issue versus just saying, oh my gosh, we got to just load you with antihistamines. That doesn't do the issue. The genetic expression, if you see it, you could go, okay, you do have this excessive expression. That's why you feel so lousy, but suppressing your histamine with antihistamines for the rest of your life isn't going to fix it either. We know that's the compromise. What we need to do is get back to root cause issues of what's triggering the genetic expression to be more compromised. Are you guys going to cover some of those foundational things that then can drive the problems that we might see? Chronic infections, are you guys going to tie into maybe the iron dysregulation and how that can trigger cell stress and cellular hypothyroidism?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you made a great point about, people have had these genetic, polymorphisms their whole life. And it took a certain point, kind of a breaking point, where now something like that is relevant. So, in our course, it kind of goes back to the traffic on the highway. You can't look at just one piece of this. You can't just look at the genes. And this course is not going to be something where, hey, these deal breakers are there. And, besides the MTHFR component, it's not about one gene, one supplement support, and that's how you got to fix this scenario, because you got to take a step back, that 30,000 foot view, and look at what's putting the traffic on the highway in the first place. We're talking about, the whole histamine side of things with gut histamine is their lifestyle components. Big craze now is, ketogenic diet. And I got a lot of people coming in to a ketogenic diet, just aren't feeling better, not losing the weight, because they're doing it because they're reading out there that it's the way to go for thyroid health, to be able to lose weight, whatever it may be. And it's like, if somebody's goes into it where they have a ABP1 gene variant and they got an inability to make enough diamine oxidase enzymes to control that histamine burden coming into the system, it's like that increased traffic is basically just that lifestyle change that they add into the mix. And then it's going to put more of a demand on methylation activity to help clear that histamine out. And then they may go to their doctor because maybe they're now eliciting some skin issues because some of that histamine is getting absorbed. And then you talk about, hey, they're getting thrown on antihistamines, which we know antihistamines can actually fuel mast cell activation. So then it's actually adding more to the story. So in a course like this, I think that's what makes this difference. And I hate that we named this MTHFR Crash Course. We kind of had to make it kind of sexy and appealing out there. But the thing is, it kind of gets into these other genetic components, but more importantly, how does lifestyle and chronic infections and toxicity burden put that traffic on the highway, and where do some of these stressors or epigenetic factors tend to hit us a little bit harder when we have that genetic predisposition going into it?
Yeah, I think that's great, because most of the courses are going to do, you have this gene SNP, take this supplement. And
right.
what you guys are saying is, hey, we're going to explain the genetics. We're going to explain how these things can manifest. And then we're going to help you understand maybe the things that are causing you to have that manifestation. And we're going to help you go back to the root cause foundational issues, because that's ultimately the best way to control your abnormal genetic expression, I don't even know if it's abnormal, but your different genetic expression is still to focus on foundational issues and good quality diet and lifestyle and sleep habits and reduced emotional stress and all the things that we talk about in functional medicine that just aren't that sexy, because that requires sometimes a lot of self-work. And I think we still have that pill for every ill mentality. We all do. I mean, when you don't feel good, you go, what can I take to feel better? instead of doing that kind of, look in the mirror and say, okay, why am I feeling sick and run down? Well, I haven't slept in a couple nights. I've had too much alcohol in the last 2 weeks. We have to look.
It's easier to take a pill than it is to fix a lifestyle. It just requires more work to change your diet, to stop doing your bad habits. Those things take time and effort. And again, there's people out there who just I have this gene, I want this supplement, and most of those people will realize after a period of time that that's not working. It's not fixing their problem. And I think that your course is great for more than just people who have probably either know or don't know that they have MTHFR, but also to kind of open their eyes to maybe the other genes that are out there. But also it probably is going to give people knowledge on lifestyle stuff that could impact overall health. I think that this course could be good for people more than just MTHFR. It could be people who have chronic health issues, the thyroid people that listen to this. I think this would be a good crash course for them to just learn. I think that this is a good opportunity for people to learn about other factors that aren't being talked about that could be impacting their health.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons that I think it was important to get you guys on, because when you start to talk about what people are struggling with, definitely there are things like diet and lifestyle that we need to help them understand can be changed or cleaned up. But for many of these people, once that they shift into a stress or cell danger response and it becomes chronic, their cellular physiology can be long-term start to become compromised. And it's not easy to shift back from this allostatic kind of stressed physiology back to a homeostatic or non-stressed physiology. And some of the genetics may make that hard to come back from, because if they have some of these genetic expressions and they deplete nutrients and cofactors much faster, going to your analogy, either Joel or John came up with, sometimes they wind up with cofactor deficiencies or nutrient deficiencies as a result of their genetic predispositions that then make it hard for them to rebound, to recover. And so we do have to support some of those really important factors, especially sometimes those B vitamins. I always look at it like the deficiencies are like potholes, right? And so, if you're going to pave the road, you have to fill the pothole before you want to do the full pave, or otherwise you'll just have a well-paved pothole, right? So sometimes the supplementation is really important, but I think this will be a really important talk, because I think you're going to, if you get to some of the root of the issues, and I'm tempted to listen in myself on the things that I think you're going to be covering here, especially with the iron, the copper, and the magnesium, because I think really for our listeners, those things are really foundational to why people struggle. I mean, iron dysregulation is a huge factor in why people struggle with chronic infections, why they struggle with chronic oxidative stress, why they struggle with chronic inflammation. I can tell you, if I look at 100 blood panels in a month, 90% of those people are magnesium deficient and not aware of it. So if somebody knows that they're going to have greater challenges potentially with magnesium absorption, utilization, especially if their doctor's aware of that, they can take appropriate actions to help them out, because magnesium is one of those things that I'd say the vast majority of people are really struggling with, is magnesium issues as well. So I think these are really hot topics that you're working on. I think it'd be great for almost anybody to go through the course. So can you guys give us some information? Like if a listener's interested in learning more and doing the MTHFR Crash Course, can you explain the course a little bit? Obviously, we'll put some information out there as to where they can go, where they can sign up, where they can find more information about it. But can you guys give an outline of the program, what's going to be covered?
I'll start from the first couple of weeks, and then John can kind of get into the latter weeks. But basically, the initial part is just giving you the the rules of the game, so to speak, Eric, in terms of, here's how the gene report works. Here's what RSID numbers mean, why they're clinically significant, why you don't want to just go and download a report and look at every single gene out there in the world and start to go crazy because you see like red and yellow in there, right? So we really want to give a primer as to what does this all mean, and then really relate it back to why they joined the program and why they're not moving the needle. Because that's really the other question is, this is for a lot of people that they are missing 1 or 2 or 10 degrees in the wrong direction. And it is nice at the end of the day, whether we know that stress is the driver of the gene being on or off, we still want to have a cheat sheet, so to speak, where we can start to prioritize, hey, here's where some susceptibilities may lie with what you have. And so that when we reverse engineer that and put it together in form of an algorithm where it's not too complicated, where here's the susceptibilities of here's the blueprint. Here's the, these highways go here, these highways go here. We prioritize these particular major energy producers in the body that can be the major cause of in the person's case, a cellular hypothyroid problem. So we really want to give the basic rules of the game and really think outside the box when it comes to the latter lessons, where we are, as John will say, looking into other things that will drive the perfect storm of iron metabolism, and that will obviously impact the cellular level so that the mitochondrial health isn't even functioning, and we're not even concerned about a nutrient per se. We're concerned about getting the system back online. But it really does give us a starting point from very general to the, hey, here's how the rules of the game work. Here's how we're going to customize it to what your specific gene SNPs are. And then here's, some tools and done for you PDFs when after each lesson, to be able to approach your doctor, print out, and have actionable steps as to what you can do about it. So it's not like John says, just going to create a whole slew of more questions to the already huge questions that you have, which you see that all the time, where they just walk away with a genetic impression with more questions than they started with. So we really want to have it set up that way, Eric, where the course is interactive, and that's what we're doing in terms of a bonus section on Thursdays. The course is Tuesdays. It starts April 2nd, and basically they sign up. We'll give you the link so that you can post that. But they would sign up. They would get their intro to their own private Facebook group, which John and I would be able to build a community and answer questions. That's on a Tuesday night, April 2nd. It's all going to be recorded. They're going to get the entire replay module that never expires. And John said we wanted to make sure it was interactive on the night that we teach, but specifically on the Thursdays, we are going to be handling their Q&As so that they can have those questions be answered by John and myself, and that's added value we're giving. As far as the top 5 and top 10, and probably we can even get into top 25, but we're really putting a curriculum around in the later weeks where John can get into is the SNPs that are these problems with genetic susceptibilities and epigenetic overlapping perfect storms with, like you've mentioned, in the copper and iron and magnesium. And John, you can get into it actually. Why don't you tell them a little bit?
So let me interrupt real quick. So if somebody is interested in the course, right? Just so we have it on air, what's the name of the link of where they need to go? Is an easy link?
Yeah, it's really easy. It's just MTHFR Crash Course.com. It's all one word. MTHFR Crash Course.com is what it is. And yeah.
So the second question is, you're going to have people who know MTHFR, some that have heard about it, some have only had MTHFR done. Do they need to come into this with a genetic panel already done? Do they need to come into this with no real background in genetics? is there a specific genetic reporting system that you guys are that you recommend that they have before they come in? Or are you going to give options as to how to get their genetics done? You're going to lay that out for them, how to get their genetic reporting done, and what's the best reporting system? Because there's a lot. Are you guys going to cover that in the course?
Yeah, and that's something we're going to cover in the first weeks, because if somebody, I see all the time, maybe somebody's primary doctor ran MTHFR and they come to me because they got diagnosed with MTHFR and the sky is falling, and really kind of teaching them, in the beginning, all right, hey, this is where you probably should look to get a genetic test, because there's a lot of different options out there. Do you go with Ancestry or 23andMe, and do you worry about maybe some of the privacy components out there? There's some other tests that are a little bit more thorough. Talk about some of the interpretation platforms that kind of take this raw data and organize it so you can have a nice flashy report to kind of read. So we're going to be going through all that is, what in our opinions, the good and the bad with all the genetic reports that are out there, the good and the bad with some of the interpretation platforms that are out there, to be able to kind of say, all right, beyond MTHFR and COMT and CBS genes, if you're going to look at some of these kind of advanced things, like, you're talking about iron, copper, magnesium as huge factors, and in my opinion, starting points. What are the genetic tests that are going to test those things, and what are the genetic reports that it's going to give that information? So yeah, it's something that we're going to teach. Now, is it an absolute necessity for somebody to have a genetic test prior to starting the course? No. Everybody's starting point is going to be different. We've had a handful of doctors already register as well that want to, that maybe kind of have a little understanding, but they're seeing this more, patients bring these reports in, they kind of want a little bit more information in this as well. So, everybody's starting point's different. So it's not a necessity to have the test, but the thing is I'm sure people, once they get into this, are going to want to test genetics on themselves to have this information. And what's great is, it's a live interactive course, but they're going to have access to the replay, so that they're going to be able to, months later, when they maybe have their genetic report in front of them, they're going to be able to kind of go back to the information and really kind of get back after and decipher through some of this information. Because like I said, there are going to be people coming into this with nothing, and there's going to be people coming into this that have maybe already ran something like a 23andMe on themselves, have ran it through something like a genetic genie or a strategy or something along those lines, and are pretty well versed in it. We want to kind of open their eyes and say, hey, there's more to this, and there's more to this because what you're doing isn't working, and some of these other factors could be big missing pieces of this puzzle.
Yeah. So I just wanted to make sure the listeners know that if they want to sign up for the course, you don't need to have your genetic report done already. And even if you did have your genetic report done, the docs are going to cover how to get a genetic report done, the right place to get their genetic profile done. They'll talk to you about the options of those things, and then they'll give you some idea of the different reporting systems and what they recommend, especially for these maybe more important, not as currently sexy SNPs that everybody's talking about, but probably more important when it comes to ultimately what's creating your chronic health conditions, and especially when it comes to cellular hypothyroidism. All right, so it's a 6-week course. You're going to talk to them about, these are what genetics, epigenetics, these are the prime SNPs that we talk about, the ones that you guys are really kind of honed in on as maybe the bigger primary things to talk about. You're going to talk to them about where to get those reporting systems done, and then you're going to start to lay out how to interpret them, and maybe things that they can do foundationally and even supplementally, if it's appropriate, to try and support their health issues, right? Are you going to tie in, are you looking at lab work too as part of that course? Or going to tell them, hey, these factors may be related to your, why you see this on a lab report, or why you have these types of symptoms or condition?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the biggest things we want people to be able to, go through this course and leave with is, like Joel said, you have a genetic test and you have, more answers you started with. We want to, have it where, yeah, people are going to have more answers, but they're going to be more kind of tuned in on what those questions that they need to ask. And we want to do is kind of narrow down their rabbit holes. And so that comes into where if somebody's got, certain genetic weakness, is to leave it in terms of, okay, what are maybe some of the dietary things they should consider? What are some of maybe the nutrient things they should consider? But then also, what are some of the maybe testing things that they should consider and be able to go back to their doctor and ask for? So if somebody's got a lot of, let's say, ornithine trancarbolase genes, where they, are having issues in urea cycle function, they maybe want to do a urinary organic acid test, look orotic levels or look at ammonia levels to really kind of hone in and figure out, okay, yes, I've got genetic SNPs here, but is it a problem? If somebody's got some of those ABP1 genes with, in a higher likelihood that they got diamine oxidase deficiency, what are the labs out there that check those things to figure out, okay, is this a problem or not? Because if somebody's got those genetic variants and you can run a test that shows that, yes, they have a deficiency in DAO levels and their histamine or zonulin levels are through the roof, that tells them that, hey, you got to maybe really consider a lifestyle change of maybe a lower histamine diet, and you probably need to supplement with, diamine oxidase enzymes, and maybe not just one capsule with meals, maybe a little bit more initially, and then they'll backtrack that off. So we want people to leave this course with, kind of a better game plan into what the questions are, more directly that they need to kind of ask doctors going forward in terms of, hey, can I, what about this test? Because a lot of the patients that we see, or the people that are actually going to work through this course, are probably already working with a functional medicine doctor, and so they may have a relationship where they can go back and ask them to run, an organic acid test, or ask them to run the 5150 from Dunwoody Labs that tests diamine oxidase and zonulin and histamine levels, and give maybe more of an insight that, yes, some of these deal breakers from a genetic standpoint are players going on that if they don't get that under control, nothing else they're doing may be as effective.
Yeah. And I think that's really important, because if you've got, and to tailor into that, because it's right now, it's the hot thing. Everybody's talking about viruses and causing Hashimoto's and thyroid autoimmunity. If you know that you have the genes that may compromise your iron regulation, and you're struggling with chronic infections, and your doctor is just looking at maybe your thyroid panel, or maybe a general metabolic panel, but they're not looking at your iron markers, that becomes now one of those things where if you see you have that genetic expression, that can be a huge aha moment for maybe you or maybe your doctor, if they understand this, what the role of iron is in chronic infections. You're going to go, oh, no wonder I've had chronic Lyme, or I've had chronic Epstein-Barr, or I have insulin resistance or diabetes or prediabetes, because I've got iron dysregulation, and that is feeding these chronic organisms. The organisms aren't going away. Spoiler alert for anybody who doesn't know this, you don't really get rid of the bacteria, the viruses, the parasites. They just they're either, you can try and kill them, but for the most part, we just put it, when we can control iron physiology, we put them into functional dormancy. So they just go, they're often quiet, and they're just not, they're dormant, they're not active. But when that iron's dysregulated, you're constantly feeding infections. It's near impossible. You can bomb the body with antibiotics and antivirals and all these things, but as long as the fuel is there for the organism's coming back. And so if you know, and you go through the course and you find out that, hey, these are genes that I should probably get looked at. Now you'll understand where to find those, because it's not on every genetic reporting system. You'll now understand, these guys are going to explain to you why that's so important to causing your chronic cellular hypothyroidism, or how that ties into thyroid hormone deactivation in the cell to some degree. They'll tie it into why you have chronic infections. And then instead of going from functional medicine practitioner to functional medicine practitioner, always thinking that doctor is going to give you the latest and greatest Lyme treatment or Epstein-Barr treatment or whatever, you may find out that, hey, at the root of my issue is maybe the bacteria or a virus or an organism, but the only reason it persists, after 5 or 6 rounds of antimicrobials or antivirals, is because I have iron dysregulation. And the root way for you to get control of your health is to deal with, you can't change the gene per se, but you're going to have to do a much better job regulating iron physiology. And I'm sure you guys are going to cover, hey, if you got this gene and you have problems with iron overload, these are steps that you can take to manage that iron overload, to keep that iron under control and not wind up with chronic inflammation, oxidative stress, and organism overload, right? And you're cool with what I said?
Absolutely. And, you know, what I do in practice, you know, the iron story is always kind of priority number one at some level. And then number two is kind of histamine metabolism and all the facets that go with that. Because when you talk about, you know, somebody with chronic Lyme or chronic Epstein-Barr virus that, you know, is affecting low thyroid function, you know, what that thyroid, you know, that unbound thyroid or that unbound iron or not being able to regulate your iron properly is going to do, like I said, it's going to feed the infection aspect, but then in turn, you know, what it's going to do is it's going to drive that oxidative stress. It's going to deplete your glutathione levels. And then all that unbound iron and copper is going to gravitate towards things like hydrogen peroxide and drive some nasty hydroxyl radical, you know, inflammation processes that is just kind of an uphill battle. Like I said, you can throw microbial after microbial, but if you don't stop what iron is doing from feeding the infection, or what iron is doing to binding with hydrogen peroxide or binding with other free radical aspects, you know, just inflammation can never get under control at a level where somebody can truly start healing.
Yeah, and it's a vicious cycle, because if you have iron dysregulation reactivating organisms, then you want your body to increase oxidative stress. That becomes part of the protective mechanism. And so now you have more oxidative stress, and you start this cascade of events that become the chronic infection. And fortunately, we spend so much time on the chronic infection. And I had somebody say to kind of call me on saying, well, you don't believe there's such thing as chronic Lyme or chronic. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that they are a problem when they're active and live, but we have to get to the root cause as to why. And I think that's one of the beauties of understanding, maybe especially some of these we're calling them non-sexy genetic polymorphisms, to understand how these things can, once the train is set in motion, how these things can really be a compromise, and that there are strategies that you can utilize to help get these things under control. And I agree with you, John. I think iron dysregulation is one of those key foundational things that really need to be looked at as a primary thing. And I think even in functional medicine, I know I got taught inappropriately about what iron and ferritin and all those things were supposed to be. And now I realize, oh my gosh, what were we thinking? Trying to jack people's ferritin levels up to where they were, and what that really, really, truly means about their cellular health. So listen, guys, I'm real excited about it. I think this is a great course that you guys have put together. I think it's a great thing for our listeners and for the patients themselves, and even for the docs. I mean, I'm excited. I think I'm excited to hear how the whole process goes and how you guys tie it in together. Obviously, I got a summary of what you guys are going to do, but I think there's valuable information for both the patient and the doctor here. So kudos to you guys. And this is MTHFR Crash Course, right? .com.
MTHFRCrashCourse.com. Yep, absolutely.
So that's where you want to go to sign up for the course. And I think anybody who goes into this with whatever kind of knowledge base you have, you're going to walk out of here, out of the course, with a much, much better understanding of how to look at your physiology and how to start helping yourself heal and improve. Because I think these guys are very much in line with what Dr. Eric and I talk about all the time, which is you have to look at the physiology as a whole. And you have to address foundational issues. You have to look at physiology as a whole, and that the genetics are just roadmaps. They are not the thing. Just like a blood test is not the problem. We talk about that all the time. Your low T4, high TSH, that's not the problem. That's the signpost to a problem. The same with your genetic polymorphisms. They are a signpost to where things could potentially go, and these guys are going to lay it out for us. So, hey guys, I appreciate you coming on. I'm glad we got you on to lay it out to our listeners about what the MTHFR Crash Course is all about. And I'm excited to see where it goes, and then to see what round 2 is, because I've already got a list of probably other genes that probably need to go through Crash Course number 2 that I think that are critical to health and well-being. So I'm glad you guys are doing the course. And Joel, I'm sorry I doubted you in the beginning, and I'm excited.
All right, it's all right. No, listen, I that's why I hitched my wagon to John Thomas, because you know, it's a good foundational, strong, you know, what's coming down the pike. And you know how it is, Eric. I mean, how ferritin and iron transport and autophagy and histamine, they weren't on your radar as a practitioner 4, 5, 6 years ago when you first got in this game. And on top of that, when you're working with patients from a clinical in the fields, not in the ivory towers, but actually in the implementation process of it, and seeing something's missing here. You know, and then that's where John and I just sort of, you know, sparked a wildfire. And he's like, yeah, I've been noticing, I've been getting some real slam dunks because there's these top genes that when I didn't have that piece of information, something wasn't adding up. And I think that's what practice is, Eric. You know, there is going to be the 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, and there's always going to be new information that allows the astute doctor and patient to be able to realize, okay, as long as I haven't moved this needle the way that we want to, and I'm still dealing with a problem that's not at the level that I want to be at, what else can I know or do that I'm missing out on? And that's what our goal of the course really has been for that.
Excellent. Erica?
I think it's a great course. I think people should check it out. And I commend you guys for putting this together. It's not easy to put a course together that sounds like it's got a lot of information put together.
Right.
Thank you for having us. I appreciate it, though. That's great.
Yeah. All right, guys. So thanks for coming on, everybody. It's MTHFRCrashCourse.com. If you're interested, go check it out. You can see what it's all about. If I urge anybody who's struggling with chronic health issues to sign up, listen to what these guys have to say, get that information, use that as a tool to help yourself and to help your functional medicine practitioner about what's going on. And if you are working with a functional medicine practitioner, and you might want to introduce the MTHFR Crash Course to them so that they can be working along with you and understanding what you're talking about when you come back and talk to them about what you learned. So, hey guys, we're going to let you guys sign off. Thanks for coming on the show, and we'll look forward to hearing what happens through the MTHFR Crash Course.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Yep. Take care, guys.
Take care.